Okay, welcome back everyone. So now we're going to get into perspective, and this is one of the things that makes this program very powerful and very just great to use in general, but this is one of the tools that first led me to really want to start using this program because it was pretty much exclusive. There's some other programs now that do support it, but this is still, I find, one of the best perspective tools to use in general. So we'll start with creating a new canvas, even though I've got one already here. Just go to File, New, and you can really designate whatever you need, but I'll just go with the 4x8 at 300. Hit OK. You can name it, but we don't really need to. And I've actually already created a canvas. So we'll go with this, and then we're going to go to Layer, Ruler, Create Perspective Ruler. Now the really neat thing about this, it'll give you the option to do 1, 2, or 3 point. We'll go through each one of these, but we'll start with the 1 point perspective, which is actually, for the most part, the most common anyways. There's obviously uses for all of them, but 1 point perspective is just really what it all boils down to, and I'll just show you how we go ahead and go about placing this. So use this icon right here to select it and move it, okay, and you can grab each one of these points. If you grab these plus signs, you're actually going to tilt the horizon line, like so. Now, I don't really recommend that because you can tilt your object or your scene after you create it as a layer. So you really don't need these, but it's there if you need it. So if you want to tilt the scene and do something more dramatic with your camera angle, you can hit Command Z and get back like I just did there, Control C if you're on a PC. And so now we can move these anywhere we want. And just remember basics of perspective. If it's a high horizon point, you're looking down at objects. If it's a low horizon point, you're looking up at objects. So we'll get into that a little bit further, but hopefully you already have a good understanding of how perspective works. I just more or less want to show you how you're going to create perspective within this program using these tools. So after you get comfortable moving this around, also realize that you can move the perspective guides around by grabbing the circle. So you can move these around. Now keep in mind, once you put them there, they're already pretty much there invisibly through the rest of the scene. You hopefully understand what I mean there. But by you turning it around like this, doesn't change anything. It just simply shows you where it lines up to this single vanishing point all the way throughout the scene. So these are just visual guides. Now, what I'll generally do, and we'll do this later on in the course here, is we'll rough sketch something out, and then I'll use these to align to that rough sketch, and we'll create our scene that way. But also be aware that if you grab the plus signs here, you're going to move this whole setup here. So watch. If I grab the plus signs here, all that moves. So although this can be really great for quickly designating your perspective against a rough sketch, it's a little bit hard to control, so you got to be pretty careful of it. I generally prefer to move it around with this guide and then these here. I find the most control there. But now it will be a little bit slower of a process if you have a pretty complex scene, you're having a tough time aligning it. That's when you can get into these and just slowly utilize them. Keep in mind too, you don't have to utilize them very close to the angle of the perspective, the vanishing point. You can pull these outward and it still works back here. So I basically clicked and held, and then I'm back here still doing the same thing. And see, it's a lot less whimsical, flying around, whatever. If I grab it tightly in here and move it, it's a little bit more likely to jump on me. So just be aware of that. Now the other thing is this, these little diamond shapes you see. Those are actually to toggle on and off the perspective of each one. So if I take this off, see how it turns from a green, it was previously a purple kind of color. Purple is active, green is inactive. So if I toggle that off, when I go to draw, whether it be on this layer, it's only going to grab to those other perspective lines that are still active to purple. It's no longer going to grab to that vanishing point right there. So that can be useful when you get a complex scene and you're really trying to make sure you can only click to one vanishing point. If you want to just draw off the layer altogether, you click this icon up here. So you turn that off, go back to your pencil, and you'll be able to draw off the layer. Likewise, you can actually set up a pencil to not actually toggle on perspectively as well. That's into the brush option. So if you were to go over here and able to snap, you can also just turn it off. So you can create brushes that just don't react to perspective. So that's another way. I find this one to be the quickest. The other way is to just turn the layer off, and you'll be back to being able to draw, whatever you want, whatever you imagine, without the perspective guide kind of hindering you. So let's go ahead and put the perspective guide back on. Let's go ahead and toggle this back on. And then let's go back into selecting the ruler here. Let's close this window. And let's turn this back on. So purple is active, green is inactive. You can toggle this on and off with the diamond shapes of each one, just like this. Okay, and I guess for the horizon line, it's actually a blue, a blue to a purple, it looks like. So it's a little bit tougher to see, but as long as you're aware that you can toggle them on and off, and also be ready that when you're drawing in perspective, let's say you go to a separate layer. I like to always work off the layer itself. Just feel like it gives me another level of edit. And the other thing that you can do that's real neat, say you're trying to work out a shape, and keep in mind it's sometimes going to, alright, so apparently I've got the horizon snapped off there. So it can be tricky. So let's go ahead and go back, toggle that back on so it turns into a bit of a light blue. Let's go back to our layer, and there we go. So, but be aware that sometimes it's not going to snap properly. What I find to work the best is that if you pull in the direction of where you're wanting the line to go. So what I mean by that is if I'm trying to get a line that lines up to this vanishing point, I don't pull outward. It worked that time, and it'll work a lot of times. I actually always find that it works a little bit better if I pull towards the vanishing point, so inward. And you'll just have to test this and see what works for you. Obviously, if you're going horizontally or vertically, it kind of doesn't matter, I guess, but you'll get a feel for it. It's definitely something that takes a little bit of practice, but it's so well worth it because it saves such an abundant amount of time once you get comfortable with it. Now, the other thing to use in conjunction with this is the shift key. So if you click and hold shift, you can get a straight line. And this is really important for things like segmenting your work and getting center. So if you've ever worked perspectively and you've done buildings and tried to fit all those windows into a building and things like that, then you probably already know the technique that I'm using here, where it allows you to quickly find center throughout the shapes. So just like that, I'm able to find center, and I can keep repeating this process. And then when I go to align my my windows or whatever I'm doing, it's going to line up almost perfectly, if not perfectly, in perspective. And then I can toggle this to a blue line, I can add a layer, and I can keep drawing over top and keep refining the work. Because the other thing is just to remember that, like anything else, you're probably not going to draw it all entirely correct with your first layer. That's why layers are there, is to help you build up to the process and keep cleaning up the work and then fix any of these tiny little imperfections. But the tools are there, and they're very functional to get you to a quick level of refinement as you get better and better at using them. And remember that this crisscross method does work in perspective. In fact, that's the strongest aspect of it, in my opinion, is that by doing that right there, we're able actually to be able to find the halfway mark on this object in perspective rather quickly. Alright, so one more useful technique for finding thirds on an object works like this. Let me go ahead and show you. Let's get back to black here. So now if we were to grab from corner to corner, so again, click, hold shift, click, hold shift, and that gives us our center line. But then if we were to go from corner to center, and I guess we could draw center first. If we go from corner to center, back to corner, the area where it overlaps the crossing section right here is our perfect 1/3, or near perfect. And we'll go ahead and check that work. So if I create a new layer over top, just define a color red here, and I illustrate from here to here, then I grab the move tool right here, you can see that it's pretty much a perfect 1/3. As perfect as can be anyways. So that's how you segment 1/3, and again, that works in perspective as well in the same fashion. So it's a helpful tool to memorize when working perspectively. And then placing your windows and your building trim and things like that become a lot easier. Now, I'll be honest, once you get more comfortable with perspective, there's a lot of cheats and there's a lot of areas where you just kind of fake it and get it done, especially in comics. I've found that's very prevalent. But it's good to know these things so that you can always bring yourself back to square one and get it right if you need to. Okay, so now let's go through some of the controls in the layer setting for the ruler itself. So if you were to right click on the ruler here, you can see you get these options. And keep in mind that if you right click on the layer itself, you're going to get a different set of options. And these are for the layer, not the ruler. So you have to hover right over this icon here, right click, and you're going to get to things like delete the ruler. So maybe once you're done with it, you just want to get rid of this and make it a regular layer. You can actually delete the ruler just like that. And obviously the ruler disappears and it's just a basic layer now. I didn't draw on this layer, so that's not really an issue. So I'll hit Command Z to go back. If I right click on it and I go show ruler, I can just turn the ruler off and then go back to drawing without being locked into perspective, just like that. And let's go ahead and put that back on. Link ruler to layer, so you can have it linked just to a specific layer. I like to use show on all layers so that as I'm working with this ruler, I can just put show ruler on and off, or I can toggle it on and off up here, and I can know that it affects all those layers. To me, that seems the most conducive with the way that I work, because I can keep adding to things, whether I want to use white ink to cover something up, whether I want to paint over a certain aspect of my work, and all of it either snapping to the ruler or not to the ruler, just basically by going here and clicking show ruler. So that's the way that I've found to work the most. Showing same folder and showing only when editing target. I'll be honest, I don't use those as much, but play around with them and see what they do for your type of workflow. Again, to me, the most effective way is to let this ruler affect all the other layers and work in that regard. Okay, so the other thing I want to show you is that one of the really neat features about this program, and why I think it's superior in a lot of ways to other programs, especially when it comes to the rulers, is you're not always going to draw a scene. Even on a one-point perspective like this, you may have a scene that predominantly everything's going back to the one-point perspective, but there's going to be occasional objects that need to be to a different vanishing point. Now, that doesn't really classify as a 2 or 3 point perspective. In some ways it can, but there's oftentimes when you just need the ability to add in a singular vanishing point for a specific object, and this program allows you to do that. So what you can do is you can go to Layer, Ruler, Create Perspective Ruler, and we're just going to add another singular vanishing point, and it doesn't conflict with the existing one. Now we can take this and we can align it to the same horizon point or something else. Say it's an object like we'll just say a ship floating through space or through a city, whatever. It doesn't really need to line up to the same horizon line. It can, and you can have the vanishing point floating off to the other side, which would simply mean that the object is in the same space but on a different tilt. In this one, you can say that it's at a different angle altogether. So by scrolling back, and just keep in mind that you can move around interactively and use all your move tools, space to move the screen around. I'm using a scroll wheel on my mouse to go back and forth, and it doesn't affect anything negatively that's already in the scene. And then you can adjust this interactively with the same tools as we mentioned before, and you can create another perspective altogether for another object. So that's highly powerful. You can tilt the horizon line. Any of those things come into play, and it doesn't negatively impact your existing scene or your existing setup here. That's all on a separate layer, so it affords a lot of opportunities to edit the work and create really interesting dynamics. And just remember, you can take the visibility off the one layer so that you only have to worry about it snapping to the other layer as you're working. Okay, so now we'll head over to 2 point perspective and go over a few of the techniques for that.